Yeah,
Okay,
all good.
we're getting ready. Three, two, one.
Great.
Welcome. I would like to welcome all of you for the next track. Today we are talking about expanding the data team as an analytics engineer. As a guest for here, I have Victoria Perez Mola, analytics engineer at Tier Mobility. After a talk about dev security, we're learning about another role today, exactly the analytics engineers. Big shout out to Victoria, and hopefully you enjoy the talk.
Cool. Thank you for the introduction. Hello, everyone. I hope you're enjoying so far the conference. Yeah, and as Alex said, I'm going to start talking about the analytics engineer, a role that started appearing very recently, I would say. So I want to also explain a little bit what is it about and why is it important and how did it origin. This is me. So I work as an analytics engineer at Tier Mobility, almost a year now that I'm in this role. And I want to share what I do, basically. So a little bit about me and how did I get to be an analytics engineer? Did I end up here? I come from Argentina, and right now I'm living in Germany. For the past 3 years, I've been in Germany. I studied systems engineer, and I started working with ERP systems. Um, the thing about ERP systems is that I already had a lot of information, a lot of knowledge about accounting because I used to work with my parents that are accountants. Uh, and I also really like databases. And ERP systems were the role that pretty much put those things together. And there I got more into reporting as well and databases a lot. So managing databases as well, and from there, I moved to consultancy. I was working in a very small company, so I also got the chance to be present in like the whole workflow. So I also, aside of developing reporting, aside of managing databases, I also got the chance to build ETL processes to connect the ERP systems with other systems. And I also got the chance to get outside a little bit of ERP systems and work on IT consultancy in general. And 3 years ago, I decided to move to Berlin. And at the beginning, it was a bit rocky. I couldn't really find my place, let's say, working wise. I moved a little bit more to data warehousing, try to be more BI specifically. But since I knew a lot about ERP systems, I kept finding myself in ERP projects. And it wasn't until last year when I finally joined Tier as an analytics engineer, and I finally find the job where feel like this is what I'm supposed to be doing. And this is why I feel it's so important to be sharing this as well for me. And funny story is that I didn't really apply to be an analytics engineer. And I have the feeling that this is what happens to most of us, the analytics engineers that are around. And the thing is, I applied to a BI position, and because of Corona, the hiring got delayed. And when they finally got back to me and they communicated the offer, they told me at the very end that the name was going to be analytics engineer. So let's talk a little bit about the origin of this role. How does this role came up in the last 1, 2, 3 years? This is what Spotify published 3 years ago when they first started looking for an analytics engineer. The thing is that they didn't know they needed an analytics engineer because the role didn't exist per se. There was no name for it. They found themselves with this issue that data analysts, they needed to write a lot of code, but data analysts are not prepared to be writing code. So that code wasn't the most efficient one. But then data engineers, which do know how to write good code and have good software development practices, were not so into the business logic. So then this was causing an issue that they they needed someone in between, basically. And this is what they published. They didn't know how to find for this person, and they have person inside, like people inside doing this job basically, but they wanted to look for someone that specifically was going to be doing this job. And they publish, we are looking for an expert in building out analytical data layers to join the band and help drive a data first culture across the ad supported business in Spotify. And they even put another job, like role title at the time, and then when the person joined, like they recruit someone, they decided to change the name. Like this person said this name is pretty bad, and they decided to change it to analytics engineer. But let's think a little bit about why is that there was this need suddenly. Why is that we needed a person that could be in between the data engineer and the data analyst? And this is mainly because of the developments that we've seen in the data domain in the past few years. These are some of the things that contributed, let's say, to opening and creating this new role. One of the main things is that we now MPP databases like Snowflake, Redshift, BigQuery are the must-have for data warehousing technology. There are also new companies now that they started only a few years ago that they provide data pipelines as a service, like Fivetran, Stitch. So now data engineers don't have to build a whole pipeline. There's actually a software that can do that for you very easily. A lot of SQL first BI tools started to come up as well. So more and more BI tools started to see that there was a lot of value in having SQL first analysis and dashboards, like Looker, for example. There was a lot as well with all this SQL first BI tool. There was a lot as well a need for a version control system, because we are all writing a lot of code and we need to control that code, right? We need to save it, to reuse it. We need to also be able to go back in time to see what was used before. And that's where it enters the need of a version control systems in the data domain, right? It's not like they were new. And now, more specifically, now there are two things that are also driving a lot for this role, which are the self-service analytics and the data governance. These two concepts are also needing way much more from the data domain to be serving the rest of the company. And this is also what drives a need for a new role. So let's think about the roles that we have in a data team. We all know already the data engineer, and we all know already the data analyst, right? So the data engineer is going to be preparing and maintaining the infrastructure for the data team, and the data analyst uses this data to answer questions and solve problems. Since more and more, we had more and more tools that needed more coding, and that also there was this need to better software development practices. In most companies, either the data engineer has to start taking care more of the business logic, or the data analyst, and this is the most common scenario, they get to do way more coding and probably less analysis. And this is something that if you start working with, if you start talking with data analysts among companies, and also even data scientists, they even complain that 80% of their time is about data cleaning, data manipulation, and way less about data analysis per se. And the analytics engineer, basically, it brings the analytical and business outcome mindset that the data analyst already has to the data engineer, but it's not the one that knows the most, right? Like, that's why we have the data analyst. But then it also introduced the good software engineering practices to the efforts of the data analyst and the data scientist. So it's going to be the bridge between the data engineer and the data analyst, and it's also going to build a base to empower the data analyst, so they can do the analysis and they can work on already prepared data. Let's dive a little bit more into the profile of the analytics engineer. So what are we looking in an analytics engineer. This is pretty much the data workflow that the analytics engineer will cover. So we'll have data storing. And in here, we're talking about the MPP databases, like the cloud data warehouses like a Snowflake, BigQuery, or Redshift. We're going to then have also data loading into these data storages. And here we can use the ETL tools like Fivetran, Stitch, Adlib. This is also something the analytics engineer will be familiar with and will be setting up. So new pipelines, making sure that those pipelines are working, that the data is healthy. And data modeling, this is a very important part of the analytics engineer role. And here we're going to be using tools like DBT or Dataform that they basically allow you to transform the data with code in the easiest way possible. And they also introduce a lot of the software engineering good practices and workflow to the data management. And at the end, there's also this data presentation tools where we're going to find tools like Looker, Mode, or Tableau, where the analytics engineer is going to be working because it's going to make sure that the data is available there. But the analytics engineer is mainly not going to be doing the dashboards, for example. They're not going to be doing the analysis per se. That is what is going to be done by the data analyst. If we go a little bit more into detail in the responsibilities of these three roles to make sure that it's clear the differences, the data engineer, as we said, then they're going to only focus on the infrastructure. So they're going to be taking care of Kubernetes or Kafka, for example. They're going to build integrations. Maybe we need some scripts to gather the data, for example. They can manage the overall pipeline orchestration, things like tools like Airflow, for example, or Dagster. They're going to build also the machine learning workflows, develop and deploy those machine learning endpoints, build and maintain the data platform from the infrastructure point of view. And they can also be part of the data warehouse performance optimizations, for example. The analytics engineer will focus way more on providing clean and transformed data so it's ready for the analyst. So the analyst, when they need to prepare an analysis, that data is already there and they can trust that the data is already clean, it's healthy, it's being ingested. They're going to apply this software engineering best practices, and here we're talking about version control, testing the data, make sure that it is quite high quality, continuous integration, making sure that the last changes that they're going to production, they're going to be stable. They're going to also maintain the documentation and the definitions. So they're going to be documented in a way this business logic that they get to know as well, because they get to prepare for the data analyst. And they're also going to train the users on how to use these tools. So they're not so the analytics engineer is not the only person that's going to be working with these tools, for example, DBT. They're going to define the best practices, but they're going to share this knowledge in order to support and empower the data analyst. And then the data analyst will be able to focus on just doing the analysis of the data. So gathering the insights of the data, work with the business users, manage the business as stakeholders, build the dashboards, do the forecasting. And let's go and talk a little bit about hiring analytics engineers. In case it wasn't clear until now, why is that a team needs to hire an analytics engineer? What's like the benefit that the analytics engineer will provide to the team? So having this extra role. One of the main benefits is better data quality overall. By having this combination of the understanding of the business need and the software engineering practices, the analytics engineer will take care and will be more focused on the data quality. Since a new model, let's say we need to gather we need to create a new pipeline and we need to create new models and expose those to the BI tools that data analysts are going to use. In this process, the analytics engineer will also add version control, the tests as well, and make sure that this model and this query is the most performant that can be, following the best practices. And this at the end will ensure better data quality as well and more checks to make sure that if there's an error or if there's something wrong in the data quality, then this will be taken care of. It's going to increase productivity as well because there's no more this barrier for the data entry will be diminished, will be lower because the analytics engineer will be taking care of that. So by the time the data analyst gets to work with the data or needs to work with the data will be there already. And if it's not there, there's already a process in place. So then it's pretty easy to put that data in there and make it available and have it clean and with a good data quality. It's going to provide higher quality standards because now you don't have the data analyst coding. You don't have a data analyst coding and preparing the base or the foundation of that data of those models. Now we have the analytics engineer that it's going to be applying these practices, is going to be developing this high quality standards, and it's also going to share the knowledge across the teams. So then it's going to also make the data analysts and the data scientists apply these practices and improve tooling. Because the analytics engineers, since they're going to be focused on building this platform, they're also going to be taking care of the tooling, where the data analyst for the data analyst is a little bit more secondary, right? The tooling, and the analytics engineer, they actually have the knowledge and they have the responsibility as well to provide support on the existing tooling and evangelize as well on the tools that the company is currently using, but also be able to build or find new ones. And what is the analytics engineer expertise? Because it's a little bit of a blend, right, between the data engineer and the data analyst. So some of the concepts that are important for the analytics engineers are, of course, databases. So a general understanding about relational databases in general, also data warehousing concepts, especially nowadays that this is one of the must-haves in most companies working with data. Paradigms like Kimball, for example, or Data Vault or Emon are very important to know, to be studying. This also goes along with data modeling in general, right? So relational models, Kimball's, as I said, Emon and Data Vaults, they're very important. The analytics engineer must be very well versed in data modeling and SQL. And when we're talking about SQL, we're talking about advanced SQL, since this person has to be setting the quality standards. It's going to be also maybe building style guides for the rest of the data team. It's very important that the analytics engineer has an advanced knowledge of SQL as well. Everything that is around CTEs and window functions, for example, dynamic SQL in general. Some knowledge about data pipelines. So what is ETL? What is ELT? What is like the whole concept? How is the workflow supposed to work? This is something that the analytics engineer should be comfortable with. Reporting as well. So here is not going to be as strong, of course, as it is for the data analyst, because as I said, the analytics engineer won't be building the dashboard, for example, and they won't be managing the business as stakeholder, but they must have this general knowledge on how to present the data because they're going to make it available, right? And they're going to also model the data in order to be ready to be analyzed as well and to be available in this dashboard. So this is something that also has to be known by the analytics engineer. And of course, the good practices that I've been mentioning. So the analytics engineer should be familiar with software engineering development in general, the process in general, version control systems like Git or GitHub, then testing in concepts in general, um, and the standards as well, right? And where to find these analytics engineers? Because as I said before, a lot of us that we ended up working as analytics engineers, we found ourselves in this role without even knowing that we were doing the analytics engineer role before. So it's not like people are maybe applying so much for analytics engineer roles. It's something that it's mostly happening, and mainly it can be happening inside the company per se. So if we go a little bit before to what I was talking before, that the analytics engineer is between the data engineer and the data analyst, and here I also added the data scientist. This is where the analytics engineers are right now. Like if you're looking for an analytics engineer, this is the two circles where you're going to find them basically. And in general, in your company, if your data analyst, if you're a data scientist is writing a lot of code, it's probably because you have an analytics engineer in there. So if you maybe go and find a data engineer that wants to be a little bit more focused on the business side, but it's not there yet, it doesn't really want to be a data analyst, that's an analytics engineer basically. And on the data analyst and the data scientist, the same. If maybe they decided that they actually enjoy way more working on the data quality part, on the modeling part. They are really, I don't want to say obsessed, but they really care about having like good quality code. And they don't care as much maybe exploring the data or dealing with the business stakeholders. There, you also have an analytics engineer. Um, so this is a role, as I said, that started like maybe 2 3 years ago. This is something that even right now, when you try to find analytics engineers, there's not so much of a pipeline, of a hiring pipeline, because the role is still very new and a lot of people doesn't know about it. um, there's also the thinking that maybe the analytics engineer is not so new. It's something that already existed. So roles that are very similar could be data warehouse engineer or a BI developer, for example. Um, those are also kind of like hybrid roles that existed already, but the analytics engineer is a little bit more formal on what it does. And there's like a more clear difference between the data engineer and the data analyst. Um, so, with that said, if anyone has any questions.
Let's see. We do have some questions actually. First of all, thank you for the talk. Interesting. So, question from Ayab. How do you see an analytics engineer compared to a data warehouse engineer?
Yeah, so the data warehouse engineer, it's going to be focusing much on maintaining the data warehouse. This is, again, it happens the same with data scientists, right? Every company, they define kind of like their own roles. And maybe a data scientist in a company does something else than in another. So my understanding of the data warehouse engineer is that they're going to be focusing more on the data warehouse per se and the maintenance of the data warehouse, where the analytics engineer will be a little bit more across, not just the data warehouse, so a little bit more also on the pipelines and making sure also that the data is available, right? So these models that are being built are running on hourly basis, nightly basis, so that the data is fresh and available all the time, where the data warehouse is more, the data warehouse engineer is more focused on maintaining the data warehouse and make sure that the data warehouse is up, but maybe the pipeline hasn't been refreshed or things like that. Those are things that they won't take care as much.
which means they have a good foundation to become an analytics engineer.
Yeah.
Cool. Thank you
Yeah.
for the answer. Next up, we have Andre or a data steward. Haven't catch that one in the context. Maybe if you repeat the question fully, we can answer that properly.
Uh,
Or did you catch that maybe?
I would depend on when he said it, let's say, but I can say that data steward is quite different to analytics engineer
Mhm.
because the data steward is more focused on the data observability, as my understanding goes. And they focus more on knowing what the data is about, right? So, and it doesn't necessarily has to be in a data team because it's more involved with the part of data governance and make sure that everyone in the company can use the data and know what the data is about. So it goes a little bit more hand to hand with a data catalog, and the data steward is the one that it's going to make sure that the data catalog is up to date, and it's the one that will know like what is the data about, where like the origin of the data, and can explain you everything about it.
Cool. Haven't heard of that before. Thanks for the answer.
Uh, if that was answer, otherwise he can or she can answer again, ask again, and then let's see.
Cool for now. Next up, Marion asked, and what would be the ideal academic background, bachelor, engineering, for to be an analytics engineer?
Yeah, I would say so right now there are a lot of masters also around data science and more specifically BI as well. So maybe not data science, but masters that are around BI could be a good background. I personally think that my background, systems engineer, which is computer science, basically, it's very good as well because I did get to study a lot about databases. So a lot of the concepts that I use day to day, I studied them in university. So I would say that's a good. And I also studied the good software development practices and the software. Whole the development process. So I would also say computer science in general is a good um, background.
All right, thank you. Next up from Christoph, what would you say is a good team size to introduce an analytics engineer as a unique position? And with how many data analysts, engineers do they pair?
Okay, so that's a good question. I think that would also depend on not just. I don't think there's like a one-to-one. Like for 3 data analysts, you need one analytics engineer. That would depend a lot of like the amount of data sources you have, and so the amount of effort, let's say, that maintaining your data sources would need. But yeah, I would say like maybe an analytics engineer could be in one small team of several data analysts and data scientists. Like maybe you have 3, 4 data analysts, data scientists, and one analytics engineer, and that should be enough. And one data engineer to make sure of the infrastructure as well. That should be. It would also depend on how technical you want your data analysts and data scientists to get as well, right? So
Mhm.
maybe you really just want your data analyst to touch Looker, then you will need another analytics engineer probably. If you're okay with then doing maybe like the last layer or working a little bit more on the models with the support of the analytics engineer, then one analytics engineer should be fine in a small team.
All right, sounds like a jobs to be done question and some resource allocation, but a good
Yeah.
fix. Cool, thank you, Christoph. Next up, Andre has coming back. So basically, I asked exactly for the difference between a data analyst and a data steward, but I
Yeah.
think we kind of got that question already.
Yeah, and also so the data analyst definitely does the analysis, and the data steward to summarize, and the data steward knows the data, like what the data is about.
Perfect. And lastly, do you know any examples of someone who handles all the roles at once? From which point it's necessary to form a team? Similar question as before.
So I don't fully understand like to have one person that does everything and then start growing the team from there would be, I'm guessing. Yeah, I mean, when I was working as a consultant, which is not the same, I was an analytics engineer technically, but we were 5 people. I was doing everything, right? I was doing the building the ETL process, like I could program that, set up the cron schedule, but also install the prepare like the whole data management, the server, prepare the server, create the databases, the reporting, the connection. Like, yeah, if you have know people, then when you start, you don't really need, right, like very defined roles. I feel like at the beginning in very small teams, the startups, you hire like maybe 1, 2 people that can manage a little bit of everything. And then when you grow, you hire more people, and then that will also, so these people will raise the quality of what you have built, basically.
All right. Cool. That has been everything for the question. If there are no more coming up, thank you very much for the talk, Victoria. For all the listeners, if you want to follow up on her, you see her social media and follow up on the screen. And thank you again for the talk.
About the, so one thing, sorry, about this, yeah, if you want to follow up with me, then connect with me through LinkedIn. If you want to see the slides, then you can find them in my GitHub. There's a repo in there, and I put at the end a few links as well for someone who wants to keep reading about it.
Perfect. That's what we're looking for.
Cool. Okay, then, thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, Victoria.
Bye.